We are going to be showing you guys at home every single step to build your very own one of these. Right, so our first job is to make sure we've got a substantial base. We are going on this existing concrete pad. We've already checked it, it's perfectly fine. Only differences you might not need is we've got a damp course of bricks going around. You don't necessarily need that, but this pad is lower than the ground around it, so we've decided to put that on. But it doesn't matter if you don't need it, everything's still exactly the same. So our first job is going to be making up our sections of wall. So here, this is what we call the sole plate, which is the plate that sits on the bottom, and then we're going to be using 400 centres for our studs, and then we'll have our top plate on top. So what we're going to do is mark out any openings. So we've got a big door going across here, and then we can build all the sections of wall that we need to build. So we're going to start building them, and then we're going to show you exactly how we construct our sections of wall.
So what Phil is doing at the moment, he's cutting the top and the bottom of each wall before he puts them together. So as you can see, everything is double stacked in order. Right, now it's time for Phil to show you how to assemble one of these walls. He's going to walk you through the step-by-step guide to putting this thing together. We actually had a bit of rain last night, so we're going to have to build our frame off a bit of timber. But if your floor is dry, you can literally do this straight off the floor.
Right, so I've got one of my heads and my sole plates laid out, so one on the bottom, one on the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to mark 400s. The way I'll do that is I take my tape measure, I hook it on the end, come up to my 400, and then because we're coming from the left, I'm going to mark on the right hand side. So we're going to have one there, and then we've got one here. And then we're going to do that in 400 increments. So 800, same, 12, so on and so forth. And if it don't quite work out to the end, just put a stud on the end. Right, so now that we've marked one of our plates, we need to do the same on the other end, remembering we're going to measure from the same side. So if you've come from the left, come from the left on that. If you come from the right, come from the right on that one, otherwise they won't align. And now that we've marked both, we're going to use something called a speed square, and then we're going to hook it over, and we're going to give ourselves a nice straight line on our marks, and that's going to help us keep our studs nice and true when we start putting them in. So we're going to do that all the way across, and just remember, give yourself a little mark on the right hand side if you're coming from left to right to tell you where to put your studs, which Brad will show you.
Right, so I'm just going to show you why Phil has marked both sides on these timbers. So basically, if you mark the wrong side, when you go to put your stud in, if you marked one the wrong side, it'll be like this. So that's why you always got to make sure you put your marks in the correct place every time.
Right, so now we can actually count off how many studs we need, but because this end here is in a corner, we're actually going to add an extra stud. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're actually going to have 8 because we want to add a second one here, and I'll show you that put together right now. Right, so now that we've got our studs laid out, as many as you've marked out and need, all I'm going to do is going to start at one end or one of the plates, and I'm going to hold this in the position that I need to, and I'm going to nail it off. But just remember, when you are nailing it off, don't put your hands in the direction of the nails. You want to keep them back and away because obviously it's quite dangerous. So we're going to be putting 3 nails in the top of each stud. So the only thing we're going to do different, because it's a corner, we're going to take some of the scraps and we're going to nail them to this first stud, but we're going to leave a slight gap at the top, and that is to help out the electrician when he comes. Just allows him a bit of easier cable run. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put 3 of these in, just nailing them off. What we're using is 90mm framing nails, by the way. And then once we've got those in, we can come right up to that with another one. And we're just going to nail that off, and that's going to create a corner to hold our plasterboard. And once we get that nailed in, we're going to go across our head and nail the rest of the studs. Before we show you any more of that wall there, I want to talk about the timbers we're using. So you can either use C16 CLS or you can use C24, which is what we're using here. It just means it's treated and it can sit out in the weather while we're building the building. We've got 4x2s on all of the walls except the main front wall where the roof's going to be sitting and our big opening for our doors, we're actually using 5x2 C24, and that is because we're going to be installing a box steel, and we're going to explain all of that when we get to it. But we're not actually building these yet. I'm going to get into more detail so you understand how that works. But for the main walls, 4x2 C24, let's build some walls.
Right, so now that Phil's shown you how to build up your corners, now it's time to infill. And where Phil marked them 400 centres, that's actually where we're going to fix it. You can actually fix it using either a first fix gun like Phil's using in this video, or you can actually use a screw gun with screws. Right, so now that Phil's finished building the walls, what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around the rest of the perimeter, doing exactly the same as what Phil's just shown you.
Right, so now we've got one of each corner built, we can bring them into place like me and Jack have now, and then I'm just going to nail through to the other wall so that holds in place, and that should be enough to keep it in position for now until we're ready. So don't worry about getting your levels out or anything like that at this point, because all we're doing is getting the frames in position. When we come to rack, which we'll show you what that means in the future, that's when we worry about the level of the walls. In a minute we're just trying to get them in position and make sure they're in line with what we want. So let's get the rest up. Right, so we've got our walls up, except the fronts obviously, because we're going to build those separate, which we will show you. So all the walls are up, they're all nailed together, but obviously it's not very sturdy at the moment. And one step that we have skipped over because we like to slide it in after, but you can do this before, and that is a DPC. So if you're going straight onto a concrete base, you just lay this on the floor and your plate sits on the top. But because we've got this brick here, we're actually just going to sit it underneath there. So we're going to cut some sections off and slide these under right now.
Right, so that's it. We've got the DPC installed all the way around, and what that is to do, that's to prevent moisture getting trapped in between the actual base of the floor and the wood itself.
So as you can see, all the walls are up at our 400 centres, and when I say that, come over here, that means the measurement from centre to centre is 400. So when we're saying 400 centres, that's what it refers to. And we've now built up our 5x2 wall, and we thought it'd be easier to build it and explain it to you rather than try and explain and then build. So what we've got from here to there is the width of our doors plus 20 mil. We like a little bit of space to pack them out and get them level. And then to here, from the floor to there, is the height of our door plus 20 mil, so we can pack them up and down to get them nice and level. And then as you can see, it steps up to the original plate height. And this gap here is 160 mil because we use 160 by 80 box steel, and when that arrives we'll show you that installed and what it does. Basically it takes the weight of the roof and stops the weight sagging onto the doors and sticky doors and all that. It just makes for a better build. And now we're at this stage where we've got most of the walls all up and ready. Before we start looking at the roof, we're going to start bolting this building down into the floor. So you want to double check that it's where you need it, it's all square. And then we're going to drill some holes through the floor and resin fix and bolt the building down, which we will show you. So let's do it. Breaking news, the English weather is doing what it normally does, and we are now underneath a temporary blue tarpaulin. Right, so what we're going to be doing is putting some bolts. They look like this. These are from Fisher, these are M12, so we're going to be drilling some 14mm holes through our sole plate down into the concrete underneath. And we're going to be using some resin, which I'll show you when we come to do it. And we're going to feed these into the resin, let the resin set, and then we're going to bolt these up to keep this plate nice and tight to the floor. But there's one more thing we need to do before we do that. We've pulled a string line from each end of this long wall here, and then we've put a little offcut of 4x2. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as you've got 3 of the exact same thickness. So we've got one here. We've got one down the other end. This is nice and tight, and then we go along the wall checking that that string line is the same distance all the way through. And what that does is gives us a nice straight wall. Once we've got that, we can now start drilling and bolting the wall down. So we're going to drill through with a spade bit. We're only drilling through the plate itself, and then we're going to take ourselves an SDS and we're going to go through down into the concrete. What we do is we blow the hole out to get any of the dust out, and we get ourselves some resin. We're using FIS VL by Fisher, and then we just fill that hole up with the resin. So we're going to drop this right down inside, and we come up, and you just want to lift this up as we fill the hole till it comes out the top. We'll then grab one of our M12 bolts and we just twist that down into that resin. The reason we're twisting it is because we really want to get the resin around the threads. And once we've got it nice and flat, we're going to let that to set. Takes about 20 minutes, half hour, but read the instructions on whatever resin you're using. And we're going to set these in about every metre all the way around our sole plate on every wall. So let's get some holes drilled. And then once your resin's set, we come along with our ratchet and we tighten these bolts right down. So now our sole plates, or the bottom plate, whatever you want to call it, is now strapped down and won't move. And just remember, that little trick we showed you with the string line on the back, you can also do it for walls like this where there's big openings, so we've got a nice flat plane for when we put our doors in. And because our steel that going above our door is still not arrived, we're now going to start putting some noggins in until that gets here so we can start doing the roof. So what we do with our noggins, and what a noggin is a piece of timber that sits in between our studs. And the way we do our studs is we measure up from inside our sole plate here up and mark 1200, and we do the same on the opposite end of that wall. And the reason we do that is because we're using PIR foam insulation, the boards, they are 1200 high, so then that allows us just to cut strips off and they'll go straight underneath our noggins. And then once we've got our two marks, get ourselves a chalk line like this, and then we hook it on at one end, pull it to the other, give it a little twang, and what that does is give us a nice line all the way through our wall to install our noggins at. And with our 400 centres, your noggins should be around 355 millimetres, but if you want to measure them you can, and just make sure when you are measuring them you measure at the bottom, because what can happen is you can get flex in the timber and you'll get a false reading. You'll end up bowing your walls out. So just measure from the bottom where it's fixed and it can't move. So we're going to cut a load of noggins and we'll show you how we install them. Right, so we've cut our noggins to size, and all we do, get ourselves a hammer, and we're going above our line because we want that 1200 gap, remember, for our PIR boards, our insulation. And we just knock down to our chalk line that we pinged. And the way we do these is you can either use a screw gun or a screwdriver, and we can screw in the ends and then we screw down at an angle, or if you're lucky enough to have a framing gun, we put some 90mm nails in. We're going to shoot 2 straight into the noggin here. And then once we've got 2 in that side, we put these 2 in, either down, or you can come up at an angle, and that is locked in. So let's get the rest in. So now it's time to start racking our walls, and what that means is basically we're putting OSB, we're using 9mm OSB, and we're going to stick it in. It stops this movement here. But before we get on with the boards, a little trick I like to do is get yourself some lime paint, and we mark the floor where all of our studs are. And by marking these now, when we cover these up, we're going to know where they are when we come to put our battens on. So this is a little trick, makes it much easier further on. So we've cut our OSB down to size, remembering this is just 9mm, it's just designed to wrap. And then we're going to lift it up so it's flat with this outside edge and our top plate. So if Jack lifts that now, and all we're doing is nailing off one side because we need to adjust the building to get it level. That's what we mean when we say racking. So I'm just going to nail off this one side and we'll get a level and we'll rack this one wall. So we've got it in place, our one side's nailed off, and what we're going to do, we're going to push or pull depending on what our level's saying. So now that the level is showing we're spot on, we can nail off the opposite end, and what that's done with just one nail in it is it's racked. This will not sway back and forth now. So once we're happy it's level, we're going to nail off down our studs. And we like to nail about every 10-12 inches with some 50mm ring shank nails. And now that the marks we put on the floor now become clear, because we can't really see our studs behind, but if we grab a level or even a laser level, we can come up off the centre of our red marks and then we scribe ourselves a line, and now we know where we need to nail off in our boards. So when we're measuring our OSB to rack the walls, just remember we want it flush with the top plate, but we want to leave a small 10mm gap along the bottom, so we just want to cut them slightly short, and what that does, it stops any moisture getting up into the board and ruining it. So let's measure our gap, you measure yours, and we'll start racking the walls. So when you are cutting your OSB, there's a few ways to do it. You could use a hand saw, that'll be a lot of graft. You can use a track saw, a jigsaw, but what I'd recommend is a nice little skill saw. It doesn't have to be this brand, any brand you like, and that way you could just buzz the tops off and any sides that you need to cut.
Right, so now that Phil's racked the front of the building, we're going to work our way going this way, and this is going to stop the swaying this way. And how we do that, we need to get it level and pin another OSB board on. So this board is actually fully fixed on there, and I'm going to demonstrate to you guys at home how much racking makes a difference to a building. Right, so this is a quick demonstration. That side has one OSB board on and this side has none, and look how much this building moves not being racked. So this side of the building, we've fixed one OSB board to the building, and look how strong it is. That's me pushing it, and it absolutely moves nowhere. We've got it bang level both ways, and we're going to carry on and do this the whole way around the building, and we'll see you in a bit.
Right, the building is now racked as much as we could do, and you will notice one wall's missing. That's because we've got a window going in here, and the way we like to do it is to get the wall framed and then we cut our window opening after. So we've got a 1600 by 1800 going in, so we've added our extra bit for our spacings to adjust the window, same as the doors, and then we've just marked out on our studs the ones that we need to cut. So we're going to cut those out and then put a bottom plate and a top plate and frame in our opening for the window, and then we'll finish our racking. So I've put my marks and wrapped them around my studs, so I'm just going to use a skill saw, or you can use a hand saw, jigsaw, etc. And then I'm just going to cut these off top and bottom where I need to, and because they're nailed in, this ain't going to go anywhere, it's just an opening. So let's get those cut. Right, so we've cut all our studs out, and then if you've got nothing to support here, chuck yourself a little piece of timber in so that picks up the end of our plate, and we're just going to measure this like that. And here's some I made earlier. We've got our plates here, and then all we do is we just slide it in the gap, push that down like so, and then we're going to nail down, or screw down if you've got screws, into the rest of the stud that's left underneath. Right, so we're now starting to rack this last wall, so remembering to level it as we go. We're going straight over the window, because what we find is easier is to just put our OSBs on and then cut the window out after, and you will see that in a bit. Right, now that the OSB is complete and our window's covered, as you can see, it's 11 o'clock at night. But it's not, it's just winter in the UK and we love it. What we're going to be doing is covering the outside with a breathable membrane. So that's what this is here. This one is from MGM Romford, so shout out to those guys. And then all I do is I go round with some small nails and I just nail it off in our studs. Right, so what we're doing, we're pulling it out, and then on the bottom we've got those two markers, so we're just lapping it over. We like to go to the longer lap, which is 200mm, and then we're just nailing it off into the studs what we marked before on our OSB with the little nails. And all that's to do is hold it in place until we cover it all up. And the reason the lap is important is because we don't want water to trap back up underneath and wet our OSB. So we have to make sure we lap it properly so that we're nice and watertight. Right, it's the next day, and as you can see, we've got some sunlight, so you might actually be able to see what I was trying to explain in the dark. So we've got some breathable membrane on, and then we've lapped it to our marks, starting at the bottom and going all the way up to the top of our walls, and what that does is it actually waterproofs the building. So even though we're going to be adding cladding, this section here is what waterproofs it. So that is the bulk of the walls, all complete except obviously our doors and our window to be cut out. But the steel saga, the box section that's meant to be above there, it continues. So what we've done, we've had to change plan, and we're going to be using something called a Flitch beam, and we're going to show you exactly how to build one of those and what it does. And it's a great option. So if you don't want to use box steel like we was going to use, it's just a quicker way of doing it. We can now move on to steel. So what a Flitch beam is basically a steel plate. This is 10 mil thick and it's 120 mil deep. You can change this depending on the opening, but this is enough. And then we sandwich that in between two pieces of timber with something called a coach bolt. So we're going to drill our steel, drill these and bolt them together, and that makes our Flitch beam. So when we drill our steels, what I like to do is I come in 100 mil off the end and drill my first hole, and then I drill a hole at 400 millimeters. Every 400 we're going to drill a hole. But just remember, when we're drilling the holes, we're going to be staggering them, one at the top, one at the bottom, one at the top, one at the bottom. So we need them to alternate, and that's going to add strength into our Flitch beam. So let's start drilling some holes. You're going to need some decent metal bits for this. So when you're drilling your steel, just remember, keep lubricating your bit, because otherwise they go blunt super quick. And what we're doing is we're piloting with a slightly smaller bit, a 6 mil, and then we're going up to our finished hole, which is a 10, because we're using M10 bolts. So let's get the rest of them drilled out. So we're just spraying as we drill. It's just going to look after the bits. And when you are doing these, try not to get impatient and just go, oh, send it through, because although this is a bit longer, keep spraying it, it always takes longer to go to the shop and buy more bits, because this one's ruined. And it happens very quick if they get hot. And now that all our holes are drilled through our 10 mil plate, it's time to cut some timber down to match the length of our steel that we need to install. We're just going to be using a skill saw and a square to do that. And then we can start drilling our timbers. So our 10 mil plate is now on top of our timber, and we're going to drill one at a time. So I've left one on the floor, we're going to drill this one and then do the reverse. If your timber's slightly twisted, as you can see down here, don't panic too much, because as we drill, we'll slot a bolt in loose, and then we can adjust our timber so it's nice and square with the top and bottom of our steel. And just remember, I've swapped over to a timber bit now, I'm not using a steel bit, so it'll glide right through. So we grab one of our coach bolts and we're just going to slot it in. We're not trying to bury it in, it doesn't matter at this stage. We're just trying to sit it in place so it holds the steel while we adjust it. So we're going to go through and drill the rest. And just remember guys, if you are enjoying any of our videos, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button and chuck us a comment, because it helps us to keep doing things like this. And now that we've drilled through our plate and our two timbers, we just take our coach bolts, sit them in. They're going to be a little bit tight, so you take a hammer and it should punch straight through like that. We're going to do all 10, because that's how many we've ended up with, and then we're going to bolt them up on the other side nice and tight and get ready to chuck it in above our doors. Right, so now that our bolts have been smacked through, we take ourselves a washer. You can use a square washer or a round washer. We've got round washers. We slip that over, take our nut, slide that down, and then we really want to go tight with these. So we get ourselves a ratchet and we crunch the two together, or three if you include the plate, until it starts to pull. This side here will start to sink. And as you can see, this one's not been tightened and that one has, and it's pulled right into the timber. We're nice and tight and it ain't going to go anywhere. So let's get the rest of these bolted up and start installing this beam.
Right, so now it's time for us to install this Flitch beam. I keep saying Flitch plate. And just like that, it's in place and we can actually fix it down.
And now what we're going to do is we're going to chuck some long screws to pull this down into the wall so it doesn't come off and hit someone on the head. Right, now that our Flitch beam is in place and screwed down, it's time to mark out for our roof rafters. So all we do, we're going to come in 200 mil from the end plate, because we need to make something called a ladder, which we're going to show you that. And then from that 200, we're going to be doing 400 millimeter marks. Same as the walls, 400 mil gaps. So we're just going to mark that across. And then once we've got our marks, we're going to take ourselves a speed square and just pull a nice straight line across. And that's just going to help us keep our rafters nice and straight when we place them in. So we're going to mark our 400s this side. We're going to do the same on that side, remembering to have that one rafter that sits 200mm in from the wall so that we can make our ladders up, which again, you will see. Right, now that we've got all of our marks on the top of our plate, we're going to start putting our rafters in. We like to leave them long and then we cut them down after. And we're going to set the rear of the building off 100mm. That's going to allow for a gap for ventilation. And what we do, we put our two ends in, and the way we're fixing these down, we're using 90mm framing nails again. So all we do, we just spike the sides. And that's enough until we put our clips, which you'll see later on in the video. So let's get these all nailed off. So our two ends are set in and nailed, spiked down into the top plate. And then what we do, we've got ourselves a little string line here. And we've just wrapped it round, tied it off on both ends, and now when we set the rear of our rafters in, it's going to be perfectly straight along the back edge. That means we've only got to cut off the front edge when we're ready. So now that our line's in place, we're going to throw all of our rafters up onto the roof, and as we're doing it, we're grabbing them and we're sighting for the crown, which basically most timber's got a natural curve to it. And we want the highest point to go to the top. So as the weight goes on, they're meant to go flat. So let's get all these up on top. So now we're building this ladder detail, and what that is some little noggins measured to the amount of overhang we want from that 200mm gapped rafter that we put in. And then we're going to put a plate on the end of this, and that gives us our overhang and ties it back into the roof. So all we're doing, we've cut all these the same, we're nailing them down into the top plate, and then we're going to nail them back onto this previous rafter, and that's going to counterbalance that front weight. Remember, if you want to, you can screw all this, you don't need to nail it. And on these noggins, just like the roof rafters and our studs, we're going to be doing 400mm centres, so every 400mm we want another noggin along this run of rafter. And then we're going to put a plate over the front here. So let's get all these nailed in and show you what it looks like. So that's all our noggins attached to the building and pinned onto our last rafter. What we're going to do now is we're going to grab another one down there and we're going to pin it to the face of these in line with the back here, ready to cut them all off and put our ring beam, which I'll show you what that is in a minute. So as you can see, that is what you're looking at. That's why we call it the ladder detail, because it looks like a ladder when you look underneath. And now our next job is to cut the front of these rafters off. And the reason we chalk these and cut them off rather than cutting them while we're down on the ground is because sometimes you'll get a variation and the front of your soffit will look terrible. So you're better off pulling a chalk line, pinging it. So we're going to use our chalk line. And then we're going to cut these all off with our circular saw, or a hand saw if you want to use a hand saw. So we've marked how much overhang. For us, we're going to be doing 350mm, remembering that we're going to gain another 50mm when we put our plate or our ring beam across the front. So we're going to hook this up onto our marks that we made, and then we're going to pull it across nice and tight, and then we give it a ping. And now that we've got our straight line underneath, we take our speed square and we sit it on the side, and we give ourselves a nice plumb line on the side, so that way we've got something to follow when we use our saw. So we're going to do that on every single one and start chopping them off. Right, so when we keep saying we've got to put the ring beam, this is what we mean. So it's just a piece of timber that we nail onto the front of our rafters, and it creates a beam that goes all the way around. Just makes life easier when you're installing your soffits later on in this build. You'll see we can just nail anywhere. And it's as simple as measuring the gap. Make sure you land in between if you ain't going to get in one. So we're going to take our little piece, our nail gun or our screw gun, depending on what you want to use. And then we're just going to nail off. As you can see, it's daylight again, so we can actually show you some more details that you can actually see. So this is our ring beam, or it's just a piece of timber that goes on the front. So we've got a frame all the way around. So we've got these on, we've got one on the back, and we just put 3 nails in the front of each. So that just gives us a nice fixing for our fascias when we do them. And obviously we can connect our soffits up underneath. So now that the bulk of it's on, all we've got to do is run ourselves a set of noggins in. So when I say noggins, that's these here, these little blocks of wood, and it's just going to stop the timber from twisting and bowing. So we're going to be using 4x2 on our 6x2 rafters. The reason we do that is when we fix that in, we've got a gap over the top for ventilation. Because we're installing a cold roof, we need ventilation to come from the front to the back. And we are going to be using 4x2 C24, and up on top we've got our C24 6x2 because of the span of roof we've got. When you're measuring for your noggins or your blocking, just remember, don't measure in the middle. We want to measure from the end, because the timbers, as you can see, they can bow in and out and they're going to give you a false reading. We want the exact reading so we can pull all this roof nice and straight. So we're going to measure in between, cut our noggins and start installing them. Right, so we've cut all our noggins or our blocking, and now what we're going to do, I'm just going to come off the back wall and I'm going to measure from the wall 1.2 metres. And as this build goes on, this will all become clear as to why we do this. And we're going to do the same on this end. And then all we do is we pull our chalk line from the 2 marks, nice and tight, give it a ping. Now that we've got our nice straight chalk line, we just take our speed square and we mark both sides of the rafters, give it a little squiggle so you know where to put your blocking or your noggins. So we're going to do that all the way down, and then we're going to start installing our noggins. As you can see, we've started installing our noggins. All we do, we just nail into the end, or screw if you are using a screw gun, no difference. And then on this side, the way we do it is we screw in at an angle, or we nail in at an angle to pick up the other end. That's just going to make life nice and easy when we put our insulation in. So we're going to work our way through, and we can move on to installing our furring strips, which we'll explain what those are in just one moment. Now that the noggins are all in at the top, it's time to start making our furrings. And what a furring is, it's basically a piece of timber. It goes from one size all the way down to nothing. So it's going to make our roof have a slope. We're going to be making our own. So all we do is we ping a chalk line from nothing up to the top end, and we can run it along with our skill saw. But don't worry, if you don't want to get involved in all this, you can just go and buy them. But it just saves you a bit of money doing this. So let's cut some. Right, so that's what you're going to end up with, a big massive old door wedge. So what the idea is, the taller section will go at the front of our building or wherever you want the fall. So the smallest section will go where you want your drains and your guttering. So for us, it's going on the back of the building. And you want one of these for every single rafter. So we're going to get cutting and show you how to install them. Right, now that they're all cut, we're just going to slide them up into position. As you can see, we've got a few up there already. And then we're going to start nailing them down, or screwing them, remember, either works, down into the rafters below. And we can start getting our boards up, ready to put our roof on. Right, now they're up here, we're just fixing them down. We're using some ring shank 90 mils. And then as it gets thinner, we're going to chuck some 50s. And in the end, where they're a bit too deep for the 90 mil nails, we're going to tech screw them down. So they ain't going to go anywhere. And it's time to start boarding once these are fixed down. Right, I've thrown myself a little board on, and what that's going to do is just make life a bit easier while I'm up and down. So I can just move this around. Obviously, when you're working on a roof, be careful, take it easy. So once your furrings are on, we start putting our 18 mil. So this is 18 mil OSB. What we like to do, we just bring it up and we cut it in place because it's a lot easier. But if you don't want to do that, you can measure each section, cut it down on the floor, get it up. And then all we're doing is we're using some 50 mil ring shank nails. We're pinning this down every sort of 6 inches, pin, 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 down into our furrings, which are then nailed into our rafters. So we're going to get this all cut in, flush with the edges, and then we're going to bring up our EPDM. Another little step we like to take, we use PU glue, and we just glue the edges where the boards meet, just to try and give it a bit more strength. And then this stuff, because it's polyurethane, it will expand, and it fills up any little gaps that you might have between the boards. Makes for a much nicer job. That's all the OSB nailed down, ready to go. we're just going to leave the PU glue to set for a little while so it starts to foam up like this in the gaps. Right, we've given the glue about an hour to set, so now we're just going to take a bolster and we're just going to scrape any of the excess off, and then we're going to give this roof a nice good sweep, make sure there's no dust on it, and get that rubber up onto this roof. So we're just making sure the roof is super clean, there's no dust, bits, no glue, nothing. We just want a nice flat surface because we don't want that getting stuck underneath our rubber. So me and Jack are just giving it a once over. Right, normally you do your fascias and your soffits first before you put your roof covering on. Don't worry, we haven't forgot. The reason we're bringing the roof up now is we like to lay it out, pin it around the edges, and then leave it until the next day before we start installing our fascia soffits, and then glue the roof, because it gives it time to relax. It just gets rid of all the creases. You can install it the same day, but in our experience you're better off laying it out, leaving it for a day. It just helps get rid of all those little creases you're about to see. Right, so the roof's up here. This is an EPDM roof, or a rubber roof. Basically it looks like a big old bit of inner tube, and it comes normally in one sheet. You can get a pretty big size that's all solid, don't need any joins, super easy to install, and it's got a 25-year guarantee, so you ain't got to worry about it leaking. What I like to do, just use a broom just to try and sweep it as flat as you can. Obviously there's no glue at this point, so we're just trying to get as much trapped air out of it as possible, just so it's got a chance to settle down overnight. And then what we're going to do, we're going to put some scrap timber down the sides, and we're just going to pin them in temporary just to make sure that it don't blow off overnight, and then we shall see you in the morrow. Right, so Phil has currently come in different clothes today. No, just joking. A lot taller. Oh no, you're doing us dirty with the height. Right, but today we've took a bit of time off from the roof, and we're going to work on the electrics, and we're using Ryan Davis. You may have seen him in a few of our videos.
Yes, and on YouTube as well.
On YouTube, so make ssure you give him subscribe.
So yeah, today I think we're just going to focus on the first fix of this summer house. So sockets, lights. We have got a 10mm armoured though to run externally from the consumer unit to a consumer unit in the summer house as well, but we'll do that at a later date. So like I said, focus on the first fix in here, lights, sockets, get that done so the boys can carry on with what they've got to do.
So here we are inside, and Davis, we call him Davis, but his actual name's Ryan, but let's all call him Davis. Davis. So he is starting to pull the cables through. So what are the zones?
There's not exactly, I wouldn't say zones when it comes to the downlights. It's more of making sure that these lights look even throughout. Let's say there is certain depths that we are restricted to when we run our cable. It has to be 50mm from the bottom, 50mm from the top, so central of the joists mainly, and that'll be the same for when we run the sockets as well. We always run our sockets down in a position of where the socket's going to be. So say our socket's going to be on the wall here, we make sure that our cables are dead in line with that socket, and we're not flying it all over the place. Hanging pictures, especially for a TV, say it was going to go on the wall here, you know exactly that when that socket's in place, our cable should be horizontally of that socket as well as vertically as well. So that's always good to keep in zone. So any sort of DIYers always assume that there are cables below a socket, and also horizontally of any socket as well. So that's a good sort of pointers to look out for on a job like this.
So when he's saying 50mm, we make sure it's 50mm. What he's saying is, so you wouldn't be drilling your cable hole near the bottom of this
near the
rafter,
bottom or near the top.
Or near the top. So he's trying to make sure he's got enough depth. So if anything gets screwed from the top, less chance of hitting the cable. If anything gets screwed from the bottom, like a plasterboard, that screw's not going to reach that cable. So that's why he runs it there. Much safer.
Much safer.
Right, it's now time to get our roof stuck down, but before we do that, we need to get our fascias and soffits on. So the way we install our soffit, which is the board that sits underneath, is we use something called a J trim. So it's in the shape of a J, and our soffit slides in here, and all we do with that is we stick it up underneath, and we put some tiny screws up into each of our ladder sides or our rafters, And then that way you're going to have no fixings on show on your soffit. Now that our J trim is installed, we're going to put ourselves a little bit of soffit. So for the sides, we're not using vented. So in a second, I'm going to show you the type of soffit you need on the front and the back. So let's get this slid in. And then all we have to do once we start it inside the trim, if we just tap it in. And remember, when we cut this, we always leave a little 5mm at the front and the back because we want this to be able to move back and forward. And now that we've got this on, it's time to put our fascia on. So once you've cut your fascia board, which is this, so it's like a little L-shaped piece, and you can order this in all different heights depending on how high you need it to cover up the side of your building. We then use poly top nails, which are just little pins with a plastic cap on the top, and we pre-nail our board ready to go on. And what I like to do, I use a hammer to space it, slide my square up, and then I'm going to do 40mm from the bottom, and then I'm going to do 140mm. And we're not going all the way through, we're just presetting them, ready to nail in. And this step here, we do all the way around on all of our fascias. And then on the ends, when it comes to the end section, I'll just come in 100mm, 40, 140, and that just stops you getting in way with all the trims that we're going to be putting on. And then we hold it in position, and because this one is lapping the rest, we just need to cut the bottom section of board off so that it can go up flush. But once you cut those little reliefs out, we're going to push it up tight to our soffit board, and then we're going to tap our pins. But what we're not doing is sending them all the way in. We're just sending them so there's like 10mm left at the top. And now Jack can pull the plastic protective layer off, and you'll notice none of it's getting caught on those pins. That's why we leave them proud. Now that the protection's off, we can just tap these flat. And remember, we're only just trying to get them just in. We're not trying to smack these in because this needs space to expand and contract. So we're just going so they just sit flat, and then that's enough. So unlike the side, this front soffit and the rear soffit, because we've got our rafters running this way, these are vented because we're using a cold deck roof, which you're going to see the installation process of that. We need ventilation that goes up, over and back out. It's super important, so you must have ventilated soffits if you're running a cold roof like we are. So now that all our fascias and our soffits are on, we've just got to put some trims over the corners and any joins we've got. So what they look like, that's a corner trim. So these can be cut and used twice, depending on how much you need, how tall this is. And then the joining strips look like this. So if you've got a join, if you've got over 5 meters, you put one of these in. And we just use a multi-tool to cut these. It doesn't have to be 100% as long as it's flush with the top of the roof. And then once we've cut it to size, we're going to use some mitre bond. So we use CT1 Superfast. And we're only going to stick one side. Do not stick both because these need to be able to move apart from each other. So we're just going to stick one edge. So we put a bead of glue like this, and then we're going to use the activator on the side that's going to be sticking to there. And then once we've activated, we just push it nice and tight over the corner, holding it on for 10 seconds. And that's our corner trim on, and it's the same process with the joiners. We're only going to glue one side of the joiner. The reason we spray the activator onto the actual trim on the inside is because it can have a reaction with the fascias and turn yellow. So make sure you use the activator on this, and the glue goes on the fascia. So it's all a bit of a rush because we're not sure what's going to happen with the weather. You can't be laying these roofs in the rain. So what we've done, we've used the adhesive and a roller, and we've put a nice layer all over the roof. And this is a wet lay glue, so we need to lay the rubber over it while it's wet. So we're going to get this unrolled back over the top, and then we're going to use a brush to get it flat.
Right, when applying this glue, be really careful around the edges, because if you put too much, go over the edges, it'll go all over your brand new fascias, and it's really hard to get off. So just make sure you be really careful and take your time at this stage.
We're just going to keep doing this now over the whole roof until we're happy that there's no more air bubbles, and then we're going to move on to the trims. Right, now that we've finished gluing and brushing, we're just going to go around with a knife or scissors, up to you, and we're just going to cut the rubber down So there's a 50mm lap going over the edge. So we're going to do that all the way round, and then we're ready for our trims. Right, now that we've got our little 50mm overlap all the way round, we've got a couple of sets of trims we're going to be using. So we're using an edge trim, so it gives us a little upstand, and that's going to stop water flowing off on the sides that we're not having gutter. And then we've got a gutter trim, which is 2-part. So this sits underneath, and this is going to sit over the top, and that creates somewhere for the water to get out and away from the building. So I like to start with the normal trims. And in this kit, what we get is some polytop nails like we used on the fascias, except these are now grey because these are grey. So we push our trims down and over, and then we're going to put our nail in the centre of the slotted holes that are already inside of these trims, and we're going to tap that in, remembering we're not going all the way in. And then once we peel our protection off, we can just tap these in, remembering we don't need to go super tight, same as the fascias. Right, we're going to get the rest of these trims on, and then I'm going to show you how we install our gutter trim on the back.
As you can see, we've got a join here. This kit comes with joining clips. So all you want to do is they literally just clip over. So you'll push that on and that's it, done.
And then when it comes to these external corners, we've got a little trim piece like this, but these are designed for the gutter and this. So we need to break these two little tabs out. So all I do, I take my hammer, I give them a little twist, and they snap out, and you end up with that. And then what I do, we push these over this corner nice and tight, and then I put a single nail, a poly top nail, in line on one side. And the reason we do one side, so like the rest, this needs to expand and contract, so now this side can move freely, and it's only fixed to this side here. Now that all our upstands, which are these little ones here to stop the water coming off, we now move on to our gutter trim, which is this. This is 2-part. So basically, on the back of the roof, we have a roofing batten over the top of our fascias, and basically that's going to give us enough clearance to get into our gutters. This then gets nailed flush to the top of our roof. We put our rubber over the front, and this one will then sandwich the rubber in between, so that way the water can only get over this back edge, it can't get back into the building. We're going to install this and show you exactly what that looks like. So that is the gutter detail all finished. So we've got one of these underneath, the rubber is then sandwiched in between the two, and then when we come to install our gutter, all the water will come off the back of the roof and in. And then we've also got our little corner trims. So as you can see, we've left one of those blanks in this time and only taken one out, so then it caps the end off where our gutter's going to go. Right, so our roof is now finished. As you see, the EPDM is complete, and it's a nice dry day today. And now it's time to get our doors in before we move on to our cladding. So we've started off with our sill, we've set it completely level, we've packed it, and we've also used some silicone to seal the sill down to the floor. And now it's time to get these doors in place. Right, our windows and doors are in, and we're going to be covering that in a separate video, so you can go over there and follow all the steps on how we got these windows and doors in. Right, so it's now time to move on to the cladding of the building. We're going to be using this composite cladding from EnviroBuild, so massive shout out to Dan Amber and the team over there for supplying this. If you want to have a look at it, go check them out. So to get this onto our building, we first need to install some battens. We use a 25x50 roofing batten, and we install these on every corner of the building, both sides. And remember those red dots I told you to put down on the floor? Now they come in handy. We're going to install one of these on every single one of those, because that is one of our studs inside, so we get a good fixing. So we're doing a horizontal installation, which means they're going to sit like this, flat across the building. But if you want to use this vertically, which you can, all we need to remember is that you will need to counter batten. So you'll put those ones in first, and then you've got to put a batten horizontally across, so you can come and pin this in and retain that airflow through the back. So we're just going to get our measurement for our battens, remembering that we don't want to go all the way down to the floor, so we're going to leave a minimum of 10mm off the floor when we measure for these. So I've got my measurement, and we're going to go cut enough battens to do around the whole building. And as soon as I've cut them all, the way I like to do it is just go around the building and just stack them all into their positions so we're ready to go. Remembering we want one on every corner and one on every mark. And once they're all ready to go, we can just lift this up to our top mark like that, and we can nail it off. I'm using 50mm nails, remember, so because this is the corner, we've got no mark to follow, we're just going to nail it off. 4 or 5 nails in these, and it's the same process with any openings like windows and doors, so we're up to the edge and nail it off. And then with any others where we're going onto the mark, the way I like to do them, I've lined the bottom up with our red dots that we put in, single nail, grab ourselves a level, and then we can just adjust till it's nice and plumb, and then grab our nail gun and nail off. And for anyone wondering, this nail gun is Facias FGW, quality little nailer, so if you're after one, go check them out. And then anything like this where we've got a window, we're just going to shorten our battens down and stick them on our marks underneath and above. Let's get these nailed on. And a little side note on another reason I use the 50s is because obviously we've got cables inside. Now Ryan's run them to a decent depth to allow for the nails, so the 50s are just a safe option that they're not going to protrude into any cables that might be inside. And then again, little level up, little tweak, and then put some nails in. Somebody didn't put any marks at the top, so now I'm having to transfer with a level. So maybe on your one, marks ain't at the top, so you know where to put anything above the windows. So that is one side of the wall done. We're going to go around, do all the rest, exactly the same process. Every single upright nailed in with the 50mm nails, and then we'll get this cladding installed. So one last job before we start putting our actual cladding on, which is here, is to install this flyer tape or mesh, just to prevent any creatures or ants and things like that coming inside of this cavity that we've created. And the way we do that, we install it just behind our battens, just underneath, and then we pull it up and over the front, and we staple that onto there all the way along. And then when our cladding's on, there's now no way of them getting up inside, and we've still got a nice little ventilation gap. Now that our battens are all finished, it's time to get the cladding in. So what we do, so we set our height on one side, so this is where we want it. Remember, we never want to be touching the ground. And then once that side's screwed in for our piloted hole, so we've got a screw in that side and one in this side, and we're absolutely spot on level. So what we want to do is put the rest of our fixings in, and that is going to be the starting point for the rest of our cladding. So we'll get that screwed in there, and I'm using 30mm screws, and the pilot holes we're putting into this are 2mm bigger. And the reason we've got a bigger pilot hole inside is so it can expand and contract without getting trapped by the screws. And I'm not putting a screw in every single one, I'm just making sure I've got a fixing around every 500mm. And then we're going to be using a rubber mallet. I've got a hammer with a rubber cap on it, which is a similar thing, and we just be careful when we're knocking down. Gentle taps until that gap closes. So we're going to repeat that process all the way up and then scribe our top one in. Right, we're going to get on with the rest of the cladding on this building. Don't worry, if you want a more in-depth video on this exact cladding, we have got one on our channel, so go check it out, or we'll link it at the end. So let's move on to the next section of this build. Right, so with the insulation, we're going to be using a 100mm PIR board on the ceilings. So that's what this is, it's a 100mm PIR. And all we do with this is we measure our openings, and normally with 400 centres you're looking at around 355mm in the centres of these. So we just measure our opening, and remember when we built this, we set these to 1200mm away from this wall, and here's why. These boards are 1200mm, so all we've got to do is cut our width, and how we do that, we use a hand saw. You can get designated saws for these, so if you can get one of them, it's less dust. And when we're cutting this stuff, make sure you're wearing a mask, put some goggles on, because this stuff is nasty. So that's the ceiling all insulated using our 100mm PIR board. Couple of little things we need to cover. We've used foil tape to seal all of the gaps where we've got our spotlights coming out. So we've planned ahead and run our cables, as you see Davis do. we cut ourselves a square out of our 100mm insulation. We've reduced the piece we cut out down to 25mm, and then we've re-sealed that back in at the very top. So now we've got a pocket that's sealed, and he's got space to put his downlights. Little tip for you when you're installing PIR in a roof like this. Now that the top is done, it's time to move on to the walls, and what we use is a 100mm rock wall, which is this stuff here, and we're going to take it out and install it into our panels, and this will all make sense as to why we installed these at 1200mm. So to install this stuff, all we're going to need is a sharp Stanley blade, and then we're going to need some PPE, some goggles, and then some sort of mask, because this is not very nice for you, so I've just got this to chuck over my face. So this is one of the pre-cut pieces, and all we do then, we chuck our mask on, and then we're going to be forcing it into the gap, so I'll show you that now. And then what we want is this nice tight fit on each piece that we're installing, making sure that we're covered top to bottom and side to side. And then when it comes to cutting it in, if we just put it up a little bit further than it's going to be, and we just cut along the stud, so you could just do multiple cuts like that. Super easy to cut this stuff, and then that just drops down. We'll keep that for another bit, and it's the same process, nice and tight into the gap, making sure we've got a bit all the way around. So we're going to do the exact same thing for the rest of the walls, making sure we fill any little gaps with the rock wall, and then we'll show you the next step in this build. Now we need to move on to our vapor barrier, which is this stuff right here, and what that looks like in a roll is like that. So the vapor barrier is just going to give us our barrier between inside and outside and stop us from getting condensation and cold. And then once we've rolled out a length across our wall, we just take the bottom and unfold it, and then I like to lap it just onto our ceiling, and then we use a normal stapler like that, and we just start stapling it along. We're just going to work our way along the top, stapling it, and then we're going to pull it flat down the wall, get any cables we need to get through, and then just staple it randomly to make sure it's stuck on the wall, ready for the plasterboard. So that's our installation all complete, and we've got all of our vapor barrier installed. Just remember, when we're going round, we're taping any of the joins up to make sure there's no leaks between us inside and the roof outside. So now it is time to start installing the plasterboard. So we've got a couple of the ceiling boards in. We can't film the full installation of those because we are working together, you, me, the person behind the camera, but I'll quickly show you what we're doing. We're using 9.5mm on the ceilings, and we're using 12.5mm thick on the walls. So there is a difference in thickness due to the weight above your head, so they're just slightly thinner, so remember that. So we've gone round, and this is how I like to do it. I've used a pen and I've marked where our rafters are so that we know where to screw when we put these up. We're using 38mm plasterboard screws. We've got the plasterboard gun, but you can do this with any drill. And then we are lapping them over the one that they finish on by 50%, so they sit half and half. So we're going to get these ones installed, and then we'll do a bit more in depth when we get onto the walls. So that's our ceiling all up and on. So with the walls, we are using 12.5 as I said, and we're also using the 38mm drywall screws, and these are a coarse thread, so they're really going to grab in. So the plasterboard, when you're cutting it down to the length it needs to be, you want to be up off the floor. You don't never want to be touching the floor. We're coming up to the top of our damp here because we don't want it below. But if you've not got a damp course like we have, as long as it's off the floor at least sort of 10mm, because you don't want water to trap up into the bottom. So once we've got them cut down to length, if we've got any cables to come through, we're going to measure and mark those to be drilled. So just remember, give yourself a reference. So because we're up off the floor, if you measure from the ceiling, you know that that's where the board's going to go, down to your cable. And then we're going to be starting on this stud here, which I'll explain in a minute, so we can measure across and we transfer that onto our board. And then once we've got our marks, remember, triple check, because we're all human As you can see, mark 3 times, cut once. And then what I do, I'm just going to sink a 20mm spade bit straight through the board, just give our cable space to come through. Brad's now going to lift it up to the top. You can use some wedges on the bottom if you're not as high as we are, but it is definitely easier with 2 ears. You can just lift it into place. And then what we're doing, we're making sure we're centre of the studs. And then I'm going to get a couple screws to take the weight. So that's it in place temporarily. Couple things you want to check. So just give your cables a little pull and make sure they've not got trapped up behind the board, because it's easily to do. You can easily just trap it, screw it down, the electrician's going to hate you. And then we can go round and screw all our edges. I like to leave about 8 to 10 inches between my fixings. And another thing, prior to putting our boards up, I've marked the wall to show exactly where our studs are. It's easy to miss, and it becomes an absolute nightmare when you need to find where you're fixing. And then once you've got these marks, you can do one of 2 things. You can either use a level and put yourself a pencil line up your board, and now you know where to put your fixings. Or if you're lucky enough, like us, got a laser level, I'll just line my laser up, and that is where I'm going to put my fixings. And then we're using a drywall gun or a collated gun, which basically holds the trigger and it just preloads our screws and sets the depth. If you don't want to get one of these, no problem. You can buy the screws loose, so they won't come on a strip like this. They just come in a box, and it's the same process with a normal impact or a combi. We're just going to screw it in, and then what you're trying to do is you want to decrease it flush, but you don't want to be doing this. That's too much. So you just want to be pulling in flush. And just remember, when I say 38mm drywall, these are specifically designed to go into plasterboard. So don't be trying to use any old screws, because you might have problems down the line. So just go and get yourself some of these. And then we're going to fix it around all the perimeter, all of our studs. And I'm going to show you how we cut out the openings and give you a way that you can do it without the tool we're going to use. So stuff like this, we use a downward cutting spiral bit, which looks like this, on a palm router. So this is just a battery router. And then we set our depth so that we're not going to touch the window behind. And then we can just run this round. If you haven't got something like this, when you're setting out for your cables and stuff, we can measure down and mark our opening and pre-cut it. You can cut this stuff with a handsaw, a multi-tool, or a Stanley blade and snap it. Get that out first, and try not to put any joins on the corners. So we want this to wrap around as a solid piece, otherwise you're going to get cracking on all your corners. So we want it to wrap around any sort of opening, exactly as this one is here. So let's get this cut out. So once we've got our full board in place, or our full boards depending on your wall, when it comes down to the cuts, we're just going to measure top, middle and bottom and make sure they're all the same. So for us it's 905mm, or whatever your measurement is. And the way I mark it is come to my board, hold the tape at that measurement, pinch it and sit my finger on that board, and then using the other end of the tape, I'll just put a gouge into the face. And then we take ourselves a nice sharp knife and we just follow that indentation we made. And if you hold your knife fairly flat, it just follows that without much effort. Once you've made that first cut, if you just give it a little shake or a little whack on the back, you should just snap off. And then we're going to run our knife along that back edge to cut that back side of the paper. Right, we're going to get on with the rest of the plasterboarding, get this room finished, and it's time for R. Davis to come back and get our electric on. Right, as you can see, things have changed a little. The plaster has been in and plastered our walls, so the plasterboards are now gone. And Ryan has been back and second fixed all of our electric. It's all tested and ready to rock. We've got our heater on, so it's nice and warm in here. We've got our EPDM, our rubber roofs on, our Facias and Soffits are on. Our composite cladding from EnviroBuild is now installed with all our trims. Our double glazed doors and windows are in. So I hope this video has been a great help. If we've missed anything or you think you need to ask about something, remember, drop it in the comments and we will reply and give you the best advice we can.